Welcome to the Digital Agency Growth Podcast. I'm your host, Dan Englander.
Deanna, thank you for joining.
Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, so we were just talking before I threw on the recorder, and the topic is, B2B and demand gen, and we focus ourselves on doing outreach and lead gen in the space. And I love talking with B2B people because it's a less legible, murkier area, right? And because we're always going after relatively small sample sizes, right? Because people are in weird niches. It's hard to it's like kind of like wandering around in the dark with a flashlight because the sample sizes are small. It's not like with consumer where everybody's like, look at this massive amount of data I just got on this thing that worked over here. So that's why I always love getting perspective on B2B. With that, let me stop blabbering so much, and we'd love to learn about your background and kind of how you're approaching this.
Yeah, so I am CEO of Growth Mode Marketing, and I founded the agency about 7 years ago because I was on the corporate side working at a software technology company as a vice president of marketing, and we had high growth initiatives. We were private equity backed, and of course that meant they hired me and they thought I was going to be the magic that would come in and all of a sudden, help them go from channel sales to direct sales overnight. And it was a journey and it was a challenge. And I was working with agencies at the time and was finding that I wasn't finding an agency that understood the mission at hand. Like I would go and have conversations with them and say, we need leads, we need them yesterday. I need you to help me think through and execute on this. And they would come back with these pitches about the brand experience. And as a marketer, I totally appreciate the value that brand brings. In fact, in demand generation, I think it has a huge component in the overall marketing mix. But they weren't having the right conversation with me, and I left frustrated. And so ended up founding the business with my business partner because we had a conversation. I was like, I'm frustrated with the agencies that I've been trying to work with. They just don't get it. And she's like, I had the same experience. We should start an agency. And so there's been a lot of evolution over the last 7 years, but now we're a demand generation agency that's really focused on helping B2B organizations that have high growth initiatives.
That's great. And we're, of course, going to dig into that and what you're doing at Growth Mode. To go back to the previous experience of hiring agencies, when you're working with an organization, I'd love to dig into that a little bit. Like, why do you think that breakdown was happening? Like, because the agency obviously wanted to do well for their client.
Yeah.
Where do you think that breakdown occurred? Because now you've been on both sides of the table.
Yeah. And you know what, being on both sides, it really gives good perspective because when you're on the client side, you don't understand some of the decisions and challenges with an agency. And then you get on the agency side and you're like, okay, I get why they had that challenge. Maybe doesn't make it okay in the client's eyes, but it was great to have that perspective. And I think where the agencies in the past that I worked with were missing the mark is a lot of agencies hire people fresh out of college. The people in the agency world, oftentimes they grow up on the agency side and they never actually sit on the client side of things. And so when I was talking about the problems that I had, they've heard those problems before. At a base level, they understand them, but they didn't really understand them because they hadn't sat in my shoes. They didn't understand what it was like to have to justify to your private equity firm and your investors and your board of directors every dollar that you're spending in marketing and how you're going to get the company from the size they are today to that rapid growth stage so that they can turn around and sell the organization for a profit down the road. So that was one thing that I think was a real challenge with agencies. Another thing, that I've found in the past with agencies that was very frustrating to me was they would bring in their A team. So like their senior level strategists to sell me on why to work with them. And you get really excited, like these people are smart. This is who I want to be working with. And then they assign you the 23-year-old account manager. And nothing against the 23-year-old account manager, but that wasn't the level of experience that I was looking for and that I thought I was hiring. And so it was very frustrating because it feels like they sell you on the A team and then they give you the B team. And that is so common across agencies that it's hard to escape it. And being on the other side, I get it. you have to hire, you can't hire all senior people. It's not a very profitable model. You have to find a balance. But, as you think about that, as you're going and selling to these organizations, understand how they're going to view it when you bring in the great people who have the years of experience, who really are senior, and then their day-to-day person ends up being very junior. It starts to feel like instead of someone coming in and helping me think through strategy, I felt like I was managing them and telling them what I needed to do. And I really wanted a partner that would push back and come to me with ideas, and I just wasn't finding that.
Thanks for sharing that. And I've bookmarked it because I want to talk about how you're approaching that challenge now.
Mm-hmm.
First, if you don't mind, can you kind of give us the lay of the land on growth mode? You don't have to share any particulars you don't want to, but just how big you guys are, roughly what types of clients you're working with, how many clients, and that sort of thing.
Yeah, so at any given time, we probably have about 20 clients that we're working with, and we're a relatively small shop. We have about a dozen employees, and then, of course, a big pool of freelance and contract resources that we work with. And when we first started out, we were focused on B2B and kind of positioning ourselves as a full service agency. We've learned a lot of things in the last 7 years and have started to move to be more niche. So really building out our demand generation capabilities and skill set rather than trying to be full service, because it was really hard to be really good at everything and be everything to everyone. We're also in the process of niching down to really focus more on the HR technology market.
Interesting. I definitely want to dig into that. First, let me ask a big, stupid question that I have a hunch most people are too scared to ask, which is, what is demand generation?
Yeah, that is a really good question. So I think a lot of people will hear demand generation and they think that it's just another way to say lead generation, or that they're one and the same thing. And in reality, they're actually very different strategies. Lead generation tends to be the more traditional marketing that people have been doing for years. That's sending out email blasts, gating content, doing cold calls, things like that. With lead generation, you're really chasing after prospects. You're trying to uncover the 5% of people that happen to be in market now, and you're trying to pull them into your sales process. With demand generation, it's taking a step back and recognizing that 95% of people in your total addressable market aren't actually in market. But you need to be planting those seeds now, because those future prospects and clients are really important to the future of your company. And so demand generation is about building programs that, instead of trying to pull them into your sales process, you're supporting the way that buyers today want to buy. And you're building out a really large digital footprint so that they can find you, do their research, not have to interact with a salesperson, but you're building brand awareness and trust before they get in market and are ready to buy. So what the difference is now you're building trust so that they invite you into their buying process instead of you chasing them and trying to pull them into your sales process.
I really love that. And to be honest, that's essentially what we do, but from a relationship building perspective, where our whole philosophy has been, why not actually just meet these people before they have a need, as opposed to waiting till you might find them later. So we do that through email and de-risking calls through commonalities and that kind of thing. But I've never called it demand gen, only because I had a hazy definition of it. So I'm really glad that you shed some light there. So with that, that's really great. And that's something that resonates a lot with me, because when we talk to prospects and people that are interested in leads, we basically say, like, look, the chances of us reaching somebody that is going to just turn over 6 figures to you because we sent them an email is like slim to none. If you want
Right.
that, you should be just networking and getting on RFPs and maybe doing Google search ads or something like that. So with that, I'd love to just learn a little bit more about, when you're onboarding a typical client, how do you decide what you're going to do for them? Creating trust and building awareness can include like everything from starting a podcast like we're doing right now to
Yeah.
PR to anything under the sun. So I'd love to hear kind of how you're building your strategy.
So when we look at a demand generation strategy, there's like multiple components, and we view it at growth mode marketing as you need to kind of start from the beginning and really look at who is your ideal customer profile. Because I think it's very common for organizations to go out there and say, we're going to market to our total addressable market. And if that total addressable market is really large, and it's really crowded with vendor options like the HR technology space, you're getting lost in the crowd and you're trying to be everything to everyone and you're not really getting a lot of traction. And so with that ideal customer profile, what we're doing is helping organizations really hone in on what are the best fit companies that we need to be targeting. And so it's not just saying, hey, we're going to go after, like in our case, HR technology companies. Okay, what are the other factors? And if you have a client base that already kind of fits the general direction that you think you want to go, it's about analyzing who those prospects and clients are and some of the quantitative data around them. So how long was the sales cycle? What was the deal size? What's the total lifetime value of the client? How many resources does it take to support this client? What are the challenges? And then taking the qualitative data to understand what was their org structure, what were triggers within their organization that made them want to do this, and really honing in on kind of that quantitative and qualitative data to identify this is the perfect fit customer. We want to attract more of these. So then that next step, after you've defined that ideal customer profile, is determining the unique point of view in the market. And what I mean by that, a lot of companies, especially, where we work in the HR technology space, they actually don't have meaningful differentiators. We see it all the time. Companies will have very weak differentiators. And this isn't just in the HR tech space, but across many industries where you hear things like our differentiators are superior customer service and our ability for our platform to integrate and our onboarding process, things like that are really general and quite frankly not differentiators, because if I'm a buyer, I expect your customer service is going to be excellent. So at best, it's a strength and it's not something that makes you stand out from the crowd. So when you're in those situations, it's like, okay, how do I not sound like everybody else? And that's where I think a unique point of view comes into play, because we help you identify what is that story you're going to go out there and tell to challenge the status quo. And that unique point of view, in simple terms, I like to think of it as what is something, if you were sitting down, at the bar at the end of a day at a trade show with your industry peers, that you could debate about all night with them. And what is your stance? And it's okay if not everyone agrees with that stance. What you need to look at when you're looking at your unique point of view is how does it resonate with that ideal customer profile? Because it doesn't matter what anyone else thinks, you're going after a particular type of company that you want to attract more of. And so you build that out, and then you build out a content strategy and a demand generation plan. And the content strategy is really like, not only what are the vehicles we're going to create, but what are the topics, which you identified like some key pillar themes of your story in the whole unique point of view exercise. Now we're figuring out how do we weave that story and tell it over and over and over through all these different pieces of content. And then that demand generation plan becomes how do we distribute that content and get it in front of people so that they're consuming it.
Yeah, that's really great. And there's so much that I wanted to dig into there, and I was just taking lots of notes. Let's start with unique point of view. So we've done an okay job developing that for ourselves. I published a book about it. I'll see if I can sum it up now. And maybe it disagrees with your philosophy, which is totally fine. But our philosophy has been, hey, instead of waiting for people to find you, you should go ahead and de-risk conversations with your future buyers. And the best way to do that is by identifying the people that are already likely to talk to you based on business and or personal commonalities that you share. And that's sort of what we do for clients. It took time to get there and so on. So with that, I'd love to hear like what's your unique point of view? Like what's the sort of thing that when you're hanging out with other marketers, you would debate at the bar?
For us, our unique point of view is that demand generation is the ticket to long-term sustainable growth, and that lead generation is dead. The reason we say that, there's a lot of marketers out there that are still focused on the cold calls. They're gating really good content. They're trying to uncover the 5% of people that are in market now, which, by the way, I just read an article that actually said during a recession, it's more like 1% of people. And now 99% of the companies that would be in your market are not buying. But they're really focused on that. And I think that that is a mistake, because if you're not planting the seeds for tomorrow and you're not building out that trust, that you're really missing the boat. And you're going to be chasing your tail over and over and over, because you're always going to be behind on those revenue numbers and those growth targets. Whereas if you build out the demand generation engine, it's not an overnight, you turn it on and all of a sudden the leads are coming in. It takes time, it takes patience, and it takes continual feeding the fire and putting content out there. But I really believe like over time, if you do it well, it becomes a catalyst for growth and pushes you forward. And it's really hard, I think, for organizations that are in that mode of we're behind on revenue, that are panicking, to play the long game, because, they're worried about the short game. They're worried about how do they make their numbers now. And there has to be a balance between the two, I really think.
Yeah, and you have to kind of have that stoicism, to think expansively and to think long term. And one thing I really like about the way you phrased it as unique point of view is it sort of that becomes something that's attainable. Because I think when I've talked to lots of agencies where people get kind of stuck in hand wringing mode, is they're like, well, we're not a tech company. We don't have bells and whistles and differentiators or special payment plans or anything like this. So all we really have is like our people and our longevity and the sort of table stakes that everybody else says they have. But I like unique point of view because that's something, you can actually develop and actually think about without having to build a tech product or something.
Right. And I think in the agency world, let's be real, we're all doing the same thing. And maybe you're doing, just a portion of something and someone else is doing a portion of something over here. But nobody's really doing something that's so unique and new, you can't find it somewhere else. And so I think whether you're in the agency space or you're out, on the corporate side selling products and services to other businesses, a way to stand out and sound different is to talk about it differently and to have a story you consistently tell. I told you our unique point of view is lead generation is dead, but there's pillars that we have underneath of it. For example, random acts of marketing. That's a killer of success for companies, because if you have sales coming to you saying, I just need you to create this, that will help me move this deal forward, and then you're like, ooh, I thought of this. Let's go post a social post. We haven't posted in 3 weeks, and there's all these different random things you're doing as a marketer. You're working hard, you're spending a lot of time on it, but it doesn't add up to success because it's so random. And so part of saying lead gen is dead, lead gen is very reactive because you're trying to meet your numbers now, which is where that random act of marketing comes in. You're more likely to do that versus if you're focused on the long term and you stay focused on it, you're less likely to do that. And so I think just being able to tell that story of here's our unique point of view and here's the 3 themes that fall under it, and we're going to consistently talk about it, that you start to build a following of people who are like, what they're saying resonates with me. And so it starts to build that trust with them, and they may not be ready to buy today, but if they continue to consume your content and follow along and agree with it, they're going to choose you. At least you're going to make the consideration set of who they're going to evaluate before they even really dig into your products and services. because they already like you and people want to buy from companies they trust.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. And I do want to get into the tactical stuff and how you decide what you should actually spend your time doing and what marketing you should do to not be random about it. But I do want to circle back to the ICP thing, because that's, it's something that creates so much, even with agencies that have been around for a long time, it creates, so much hand wringing and so on. And you mentioned the idea of quantitative data. And I think what we find is even agencies that have been very successful and are at whatever 7-figure levels, when we ask them, like, where does your business come from, it's pretty much that they're getting 99% of their business by talking only to that 5% that's actively searching at all times, right? Because it's mostly referral or follow-on work or something to that effect. So if you're in that boat and you don't have quantitative data, if somebody asks you what's your sales cycle, what's your close rate, maybe you have data on fulfillment and the ops side, but you don't have anything about your sales data. How do you decide? And one way to answer that question is maybe you can talk about how you guys are deciding to niche even more on HR and technology and so on.
I think it's common, like in the ideal state, you have the data to back up kind of the decisions on where you're going with an ideal customer profile. We run into this not just for ourselves, but with our clients at times where they're like, but we're totally pivoting. We were going after companies that had 10 to 20 employees, and now we want to go after companies that have 75 to 300. So our historical data isn't going to help us. And I think in those instances, it's okay. It'd be great if you had the data, but if you don't, I think it's really like kind of understanding the market, what the options are, and kind of narrowing it down and testing. And as you're testing it and seeing, like, are we getting traction with this particular ideal customer profile, you start to gather more data, and then you can refine that ideal customer profile. Because I think when you're talking like an ideal customer profile and a unique point of view, it's an iterative process. It's not, we defined this and it is going to be this in 5 years. It's like, as you're testing things and you're putting messages out there and you're targeting it to that specific group and you're talking to that group and seeing how they react and whether they're interested in buying, you can start to learn more about them to refine that ideal customer profile even more. And, I will say for growth mode, the reason that we decided our ideal customer profile is organizations within the HR technology space. And there's a lot more detail that goes into it than just picking that industry and running with it. But it was because my co-founder and I had experience in the HR tech space from before we were agency owners. Therefore, naturally, through our networks, we had several clients over the years that were in the HR tech space. We had employees that have come into the organization that came from the HR tech space. And so we just continued to be connected to that. And as I took a step back and I looked at it, it was like, oh, we've also got experience in manufacturing. Maybe we'll specialize in manufacturing and HR tech. Well, we went out and talked to a couple people and they're like, those seem so disconnected. That's just weird, guys. And we're like, yeah, fair point. Okay, let's take a step back. Which one would be better for us to pivot into? And HR tech just seemed like an obvious choice because, one, we had a lot of background even prior to the agency in it. But two, as we did our research, there's a ton of agencies out there that specialize in marketing for manufacturers. There's not a lot of competition for organizations on an agency side that specialize in HR technology. And it's a huge and exploding industry, as all the challenges with hiring people and retaining people and all the things that organizations have to manage. Investment firms are putting a lot of money into new HR technology every day being developed. And there's over 21,000 HR tech vendors out there. So we just saw there was an opportunity in this particular niche. And that was part of what drove the decision and how we defined who our ideal customer profile is.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I think that the idea of approaching it based on experimentation is the right way to do it. And I think the thing that kills me is, like, so many conversations I'm on, people are like, well, we spent the last 6 months redoing our whole site around this pivot we want to make, before they've even gotten on more than one sales call about that pivot,
Yeah.
right? For the purposes of experimentation, how do you decide what test you should do? And think, I guess, to give you a constraint, imagine a smaller team, right? Maybe there's a dedicated sales
Hmm.
marketing role, maybe not, maybe it's a split role between partners. How do you decide, like, what's the way you're going to test out this pivot you're thinking about?
Yeah. I think there's ways to kind of micro measure stuff along the way and really be looking at everything. And what I mean by that is, okay, if you've defined your unique point of view and you found those three pillars and kind of the key points that you always want to talk about under each of those pillars, and you build out an email campaign, and it has those three pillars in it, and then you go on LinkedIn and you start posting stuff about them, you can start to look at like just simple things like which topics seem to have more click-through rates and which LinkedIn posts are more people engaging in, more people are liking, they're getting more impressions, so you can start to look at that stuff and see small trends. And with those small trends, you start to lean into it and say, okay, this seems to be working. In addition, I'm having sales conversations and I'm talking to prospects and I'm bringing up these things. This seems to be resonating with them. This one doesn't. And so you lean into what you see is working and you start pushing it more so you can get more data to see. And the things that don't seem to be resonating, you kind of back off of that. And I think the ideal customer profile and the unique point of view, like I said, they're iterative. So you come back and you say, okay, you know what? These HR technology purchasers are not seeming to resonate with this, but they are resonating over here. So we're going to stick with this. Let's rethink that third pillar under our unique point of view. And so you're just constantly, as you're pushing content out there, whether it's blog posts, whether it's podcast episodes, whether it's videos, any type of content, you name it, how you're distributing it, like there's ways to look at, is it resonating or not? And so it's a little bit gut. Like
Yeah.
I'm having conversations with people and I see they're interested in it and they're asking me really good questions. And it's a little bit of, I'm seeing a little bit of traction here and a little bit of traction here and a little bit of traction here, and it all adds up.
Right. Yeah. And then you get bigger signals with what are people actually buying? And
Right.
that goes to another level. Yeah. So let's keep on that progression. So you have your ICP, you've done this experiment, and you have something that's working. How do you decide what channels you're using, how often you're posting? And let's give you the constraint of, this is not a Silicon Valley funded marketing team with 20 people. It's
Right.
a partner and maybe like a 20-hour a week marketing role or something like that.
Yeah. I think as you're doing your ideal customer profile, one of the important things to look into and to do is to talk to people that are in the actual like type of companies that you believe are who you should be targeting, to understand where are they hanging out, where do they get their information sources, how do they buy, because I think that really informs then that demand generation strategy, which is how do we distribute this and how do we get it out to people. And I think there are kind of three areas that you should look at as an organization. The first being your own website. According to research from Gartner, 72% of people say that they would prefer in a B2B purchase to have zero interaction with a sales rep. That's a lot of people. I mean, honestly, I'm surprised it's not more, but still, 7 out of 10 people don't actually want to talk to you when they're making their purchase. And we've got to support the way buyers want to buy, or we're going to lose the battle against a different vendor that's willing to do that. So it's like, build out the content on your website to the point where people can go deep. If they want to research, your things, what do you offer? What does it cost? If you have a software technology, put video demos on there. Like, let people see it and play with it and understand it. The second part I would say is, okay, then get content out on the channels besides your website that you can control when and how you put it out. So that's things like podcasts, webinars, social media, syndicating your content, all that kind of stuff that you can decide how often you're going to get it out there, and you've got to do it consistently. And then third is, how do I tap into relevant audiences owned by someone else? So that's like, we look at it as like, this is the influencer, the third party audiences that you're tapping into. So like in the HR technology industry, when we work with clients, we can help them be podcast guests for industry podcasts. We can help them, there's a lot of pay to play opportunities out there where they're going and they're sending emails through hr.com, and they are having this influencer and this influencer write articles that happen to mention them in it. And, there's just all these different things from a third party standpoint that you can access and tap into those audiences as well, with the goal of building out your digital footprint to become your best salesperson. Because if 72% of people have no interest in talking to a sales rep, that's the majority of people you're going to reach out to. And so if you make all this content available, all these places that they are hanging out, this helps move the needle with them. Now, back to your original question about what if you're a small team and you don't have big budgets to do that. I think there's still ways to get out there and build your footprint. Then I think it's choosing something and doing it really well. So as an agency, instead of trying to do 15 different marketing tactics, maybe you decide we're doing a webinar series. Once a month, we do a webinar. Then looking at that and saying, this is our cornerstone content. How do we slice and dice this and sweat the content to get more out of it? So out of that webinar series, if you could get 5 social posts, 3 video clips, an article out of every single one of those things, suddenly you get to the end of the year and you've got a lot of content that's available out there to support your organization and allow people to research and learn who you are and how you guys think about things.
Yeah, that's great. And there's so much to run with there. And I have some pushback, but I'm glad that you brought it out of me, because I think it actually helps us kind of define our point of view more, which is that what we've found is that what people don't want is to be forced into a sales process. It's not that they necessarily don't want to talk to a sales rep. And the reason we know this isn't just because we're incentivized to believe this, which we are, but because 99% of the time, the responses that we see are something to the effect of, I never ever respond to outreach, but your message was different, and I'll take some time with you, right? Because I think what we found is that there's so many people that are just so exhausted with reading articles and researching a particular purchase they might need to make in a year that they're really not emotionally invested in yet. And then if you can focus on de-risking a relationship, that can shortcut a lot of that research. But even if that number is true and 70% is the number, that's still 30% of the market that will probably talk to you, right? That you might as well reach out to. So that's me tooting my own horn. But I other than that, I couldn't agree more. And I really like what you said about going to how clients or prospects are consuming information. Like we had a client of ours on the show who sell, and this is an area that they sell into private equity, right? So this is a CS Brand Group, and they do like really great work in the private equity space. And one of the points he made is that these people are sharing information by basically like forwarding PDF white papers to each other. And that's like the main, maybe it was different in your experience. That was one thing I remember, because it's like, if he talked to 9 out of 10 marketing consultants, they would have said, you need to go on YouTube, or you need to like do this sort of campaign or whatever is cool right then. So I thought that was interesting.
Yeah. Well, I really think, you have to understand not everybody consumes information the same. Some people love to listen to podcasts. There's other people that's like, okay, I don't have 20 minutes. I'm going to be distracted. It's not for me. Some people like to watch videos. Some people like to read their content. Some people prefer to have a conversation. So I think as you're developing out your content and, doing the cornerstone content and the cobblestones, it's important to keep in mind that you gotta create it in all kinds of different formats, because different strokes for different folks, right? Like some people, this piece of content is the type of stuff that they will gravitate to. Some people, it's something else.
Yeah, that's really important to keep in mind. And I think kind of there's one thing I bookmarked at the beginning, which is that agency problem, right? Of scale, where the senior people are closing the deal and then they're giving you the 23-year-old college, junior or whatever, somebody fresh out of college, let's say.
Yeah.
How do you think about that? Because it's like, okay, you're at 20 clients now. There's only so many people that can really give, specialized advice and strategy. How do you think about scaling and preventing that problem from happening with your clients?
So for us, I mean, from the very beginning, we made the decision that we weren't going to hire junior level people to be client facing. So far, in the 7 years, we've stuck to that. Will that always be the model? I don't know. We'll see as we continue to grow. For us, it was important to hire people who had both agency experience and corporate side experience. And we really wanted them to have B2B corporate side experience, because kind of going back to what I said at the very beginning, it was frustrating that people on the agency side didn't understand truly the pressures that were on my shoulders and what I was trying to accomplish. We found that when people have worked in the corporate side, they come in, there's a lot more of a learning curve for them to think like an agency person. They're used to doing a lot of different things, and people come and ask for stuff and they just say okay, and they don't have to worry so much about timelines and budgets if they're doing it internally at an organization. Whereas like on the agency side, we all know, like, you commit to a timeline, you've got to make sure the project's profitable, you can't spend too much time on it, you can't give away things for free, stuff like that. So there's a bit of a learning curve there, but we've found that for us and the clients that we work with, that it's valuable and it's important that they're not junior people, that they're not someone who doesn't have corporate side experience as well, so that we can provide the experience that we wanted to find when we were buyers for our particular clients. What happens, of course, is, there are times where from a pricing standpoint, someone will come back and be like, okay, you guys are charging 20,000 for this. I could do this for 5,000 over here. And we're like, yep. And you're going to get what you pay for. Call us when it doesn't work out. But, that's a choice we had to make is, are we willing to lose some opportunities because we have to price a little bit higher?
Yeah, that makes sense. And there's no free lunch with this stuff as usual. So, and I guess kind of getting towards the end of our interview, I'd love to talk about the future a little bit. There's lots of stuff going on. People are freaking out about AI, especially in the content SEO world. And, we don't have to talk about that if you don't want to. But how do you see this changing, I guess, and whatever time frame you want, the next 6 to 12 months? You can narrow it to the B2B space. You can go to the world at large.
Yeah.
I'm just going to leave that question.
Yeah, this is just my thoughts on Chat GPT and the other AI that's out there. There is so much chatter right now on LinkedIn by copywriters, by marketers, about how game-changing and amazing it is for them. I think where people are kind of missing the point is, if you become too reliant on these tools, there's not going to be an original thought out there anymore, because here's what's happening. Even individuals who are like, oh, I'm not getting my ideas from Chat GPT. I'm writing my article and then or my outline, and I'm putting it into Chat GPT, and it's coming back with like a fully written article or new ways to say it or whatever. You don't own that idea anymore because you just fed it to the database. And the way that this artificial intelligence works is it takes the input put in by users and it gets smarter and smarter and smarter. But all it is essentially doing is regurgitating the information that's being put in the system. So I think, are there opportunities to leverage Chat GTP, or, like I've seen people who created videos where it was kind of amazing. An AI generated video of an actual person where it would take their voice and kind of modulate it, and then they took a script from Chat GPT and they put it all together, and it looks like a video that the person actually did, with a few things that you're like, okay, there's the person is so monotone when they talk and no inflections and stuff like that, where you can tell a little bit if you know that it's not real, but it's so realistic. And I think companies are going to look at that and say, how can we leverage that kind of stuff? I think there's an opportunity to use AI, but also be aware of, if you give the information to some of these AI tools like Chat GPT, your original ideas and your unique point of view aren't unique anymore, because now everybody else that's talking on similar topics has that perspective that they can pull out of Chat GPT too.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And we've gotten questions about it, like, hey, are you guys thinking about, incorporating this into the email outreach and the copy you're writing and all these sorts of things? And then it can get to even more advanced levels, like where it's like, these deep fake sort of videos and that sort of thing. And I'm not super worried about it yet, just because with a B2B sales process, a big thing is provenance. Like, what is the provenance of this message? Because at some point, if you're going to buy, anything above $1,000, it's going to involve a human to human sales process. So you're going to have to understand what was said, approve it, watch the video, the deep fake video that might be coming down the tubes, right? So it's like, once you've done all those things, it's not a huge time saver. It doesn't give you that much more scale.
Right. Well, and
otherwise
maybe
you got to just let the robot run free, which is kind of scary because you're gonna have to talk to the person that it reached out to. So
right. And maybe if you're a BDR who has to create their own messages and do outreach, not everyone's a copywriter, You use Chat GPT, it's probably going to come up with better emails for you to use than if you came up with it on your own. Like, I think in those situations, if it produces something better than you can do without it, and it helps you move the needle, go for it. But if you're a professional copywriter and you start, regurgitating everything in there, I just say, buyer beware.
yeah, exactly. It kind of removes the problem of the blank page. But I think when some genius decides to hook it up to the power grid in the next 5 years, that's when things are going to get real interesting. So we'll see where that goes. But Deanna, this was great. I've learned so much, and it really helped hone my thinking about what we do ourselves. So really appreciate it. Where can people go to get in touch and follow what you guys are up to and so on?
Yeah, so we have a podcast if you're interested in learning more about demand generation and just thinking on it, called the Demand Gen Fix, that you can find on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, or anywhere else you might find your podcast. I post a lot of thoughts and tips on LinkedIn, so you can follow me at Deanna Shimota, and also check out our website, which is growthmodemarketing.com.
Awesome. We'll get all that linked up, and let's do it again. Really appreciate it.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Dan. I appreciate the thought-provoking questions.
Yeah, likewise.